The judge was laughing. Not a polite smile or a quiet chuckle, but real, genuine laughter that bounced off the wood-paneled walls of the courtroom and made everyone freeze in their seats. Judge Patricia Reeves had her hand pressed against her mouth, her shoulders shaking, her eyes squeezed shut, like she was trying desperately to compose herself but couldn't quite manage it. I sat perfectly still in my chair, watching her read my note for the second time. Across the aisle, Brandon had gone the color of old newspaper. His attorney, the infamous Diane Foster in her $1,000 suit, was half risen from her seat, her mouth open but no words coming out. The bailiff looked confused. The court reporter's fingers had stopped moving on her machine. Judge Reeves read the note a third time, then looked up at Brandon with an expression I couldn't quite read. Something between amusement and disbelief. Maybe a little bit of respect for me mixed in there too. "Mr. Hayes," she said. And even though she was clearly trying to sound professional, there was still laughter in her voice. "Your wife has submitted some very interesting information." Brandon cleared his throat. His hand went to adjust his tie, that nervous habit he'd developed somewhere during his second year of law school. "Your Honor, I don't know what she's written, but I've been completely honest." "We'll get to that," Judge Reeves interrupted, glancing at the note again and pressing her lips together to keep from smiling. "We'll definitely get to that. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me back up, because you need to understand how I ended up in that courtroom, holding the kind of secret that could make a judge laugh in the middle of a divorce hearing. 6 years earlier, I met Brandon Hayes at a community fundraiser in the church basement on 4th Street. I was 26 years old, working as a nurse's aide at Mercy General during the week and cleaning office buildings on weekends. I'd shown up to the fundraiser because Mrs. Chen from the hospital had asked me to help serve food, and I never could say no when someone needed help. Brandon was there volunteering too, ladling soup into bowls with this easy smile that made everyone around him relax. He wore a faded college sweatshirt and jeans with a hole in the knee, and when he laughed at something, the elderly man in line said, "It was the kind of laugh that made you want to laugh too." "You're Claire, right?" he said when I came over to refill the bread baskets. "Mrs. Chen pointed you out. She says you're the hardest worker at the hospital." I felt my face get hot. "She's exaggerating." "I doubt that." He had these warm brown eyes that crinkled at the corners. "I'm Brandon. I'm supposed to be studying for finals right now, but I figured feeding hungry people was more important than constitutional law." "Law school?" I was impressed despite myself. "Yeah, well, trying to get there. Still finishing my undergrad." He wiped his hands on his apron. "Working part-time here at the non-profit, saving up. My family's not exactly thrilled about the law school plan." We talked for 3 hours after the fundraiser ended, sitting on the church steps while the sun set. He told me about growing up with parents who expected him to join the family investment business, about how he wanted to do something that actually helped people. I told him about dropping out of nursing school when my dad got sick, about planning to go back someday when I'd saved enough. "You will," he said with absolute certainty. "I can tell you're the kind of person who finishes what she starts." 8 months later, he proposed to me in that same church basement. We were both volunteering again, and he got down on one knee right there between the folding tables and metal chairs. The ring was small, but I didn't care. I thought I was the luckiest woman alive. His mother didn't cry happy tears at our engagement party. Mrs. Helen Hayes stood in her perfectly decorated living room with her perfectly styled grey hair and looked at me like I was something unpleasant she'd found on the bottom of her shoe. "Brandon tells me you work at a hospital," she said, in a tone that made it sound like I worked at a garbage dump. "Yes, ma'am. I'm a nurse's aide." "How practical." She took a sip of her wine. "And you didn't finish college?" "Not yet, but I plan to." She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Of course you do, dear." Brandon's father was kinder, but distant. He shook my hand firmly at the party and said, "Welcome to the family." But I noticed he didn't look me in the eye when he said it. 2 weeks after the engagement party, Brandon got his acceptance letter to law school. A good one, too. The kind that meant something. We celebrated with cheap champagne in our tiny apartment, and he spun me around the kitchen. "This is it, Claire. This is everything we've been working toward. I'm so proud of you." He set me down and his expression got serious. It's going to be tough, you know. 3 years of intense study. The tuition is, well, it's a lot. We'll figure it out. We always do. My parents offered to help, but only if. He trailed off, looking uncomfortable. Only if what? Only if I reconsidered the engagement. They want me to focus on school, not, married life. He took my hands. I told them no. Obviously, you're more important than their money. My chest felt tight with love and guilt all mixed together. Brandon, if you need to accept their help. No, I choose you. I'll take out loans, and we'll both work, and it'll be fine. We're a team, right? Right. That's when he said it. The thing that would echo in my head for the next 6 years. Maybe you could pick up some extra shifts? Just temporarily. Just until I get through school and pass the bar. Then I'll take care of us. I promise. I believed him. God help me. I believed every word. So I picked up extra shifts. Then double shifts. My weekday schedule became a blur of bedpans and patient charts, rushing from room to room at Mercy General. On weekends, I pushed a janitor's cart through empty office buildings, mopping floors and emptying trash cans while the city slept. Brandon studied. He studied hard. I'll give him that. Our apartment was always scattered with law books and highlighted cases. He'd quiz himself out loud while I made dinner on my feet that ached from standing all day. Sometimes I'd fall asleep on the couch while he was still working at 2 a.m. You're amazing, he'd tell me, kissing my forehead when he finally came to bed. I couldn't do this without you. The first year wasn't so bad. We were broke, but we were happy. Or I thought we were happy. Brandon still held my hand when we walked to the corner store. He still called me during his lunch break to hear my voice. Second year of law school, things started changing. Small things at first. He stopped asking about my day. He started spending more time at study groups with his classmates, coming home smelling like expensive coffee from places I couldn't afford. He signed up for a gym membership at some fancy place downtown. I need to stay healthy, he explained when I asked about the cost. Clear mind, healthy body, I was too tired to argue. I was working 60, sometimes 70 hours a week. I'd lost weight because I was too exhausted to eat properly. I had bruises on my arms from helping lift patients. My back hurt constantly, but it was temporary. That's what I told myself. Just until he graduated. Just until he passed the bar. Then things would go back to normal. Third year was worse. Brandon barely looked at me anymore. He was consumed with law review, with mock trials, with networking events I wasn't invited to. His classmates' names came up constantly at dinner, Vanessa this, Christopher that, but he never suggested I meet any of them. You wouldn't be interested, he said once when I asked. It's all boring legal stuff. The night before his bar exam, I held him while he panicked about failing. You won't fail, I promised. You're the smartest person I know. You're going to pass, and then everything we've worked for will have been worth it. He passed. Of course he passed. Brandon Hayes didn't fail at things. I'd planned a small surprise party at our apartment with Tommy and a few of our old friends from the church. Nothing fancy, just pizza and beer and a homemade cake that said, "Congratulations, Attorney Hayes," in blue frosting that took me an hour to pipe carefully. When Brandon walked through the door and saw everyone there, his smile looked forced, but he played along, accepting congratulations and hugs. I kept catching him checking his phone. Finally, after everyone had eaten, and I'd taken about 100 photos, I went to hug him. Just wanted to wrap my arms around my husband and tell him how proud I was, how worth it everything had been. He hugged me back, but his body was stiff. And then he leaned down, his mouth close to my ear, and whispered 7 words that made my blood turn to ice. We need to talk about your appearance. I stood there frozen, Brandon's arm still loosely around my shoulders. Those 7 words echoing in my head like a slap I hadn't seen coming. What? I pulled back to look at his face, thinking maybe I'd misheard him. Maybe the noise from our guests had distorted his words. But his expression told me everything. That slight tightness around his mouth, the way his eyes wouldn't quite meet mine. He'd meant exactly what he said. Later, he murmured. then turned away to accept another round of congratulations from Tommy, who was blissfully unaware that anything was wrong. I moved through the rest of the party like a ghost, cutting cake, refilling drinks, smiling until my face hurt. The whole time, those words kept playing on repeat. "We need to talk about your appearance." After everyone left and I was washing dishes in our tiny kitchen, Brandon came up behind me. Not to help, just to lean against the counter with his arms crossed. "I didn't want to say anything in front of people," he started, "but I've been meaning to bring this up." My hands stilled in the soapy water. "Bring what up?" "I start at Harrison and Blake next week. It's a big firm, Claire, top tier. There are going to be events, dinners with partners, functions where spouses are expected to attend." "Okay." I turned to face him, water dripping from my hands onto the floor. "And?" He looked uncomfortable, actually shifted his weight from foot to foot like a kid about to ask for something he knew he shouldn't have. "The other attorneys' wives, they're polished. You know? They dress a certain way. They get their hair done. They know which fork to use at fancy restaurants." The words hung in the air between us. I felt like I'd been punched in the stomach. "Are you saying I'm an embarrassment to you?" "No. God, no. I'm just saying." He ran his hand through his hair. "Maybe you could try a little harder. Get some nicer clothes. Do something different with your hair." I looked down at my outfit. Jeans and a sweater I'd bought at Target 2 years ago. My hair was pulled back in a ponytail because I never had time to style it anymore. My nails were short and unpolished because you can't have long nails when you're helping patients in and out of bed. "Brandon, I work 60 hours a week. I don't exactly have time for manicures and salon appointments." "Well, maybe you could cut back on the hours now. I'm going to be making good money. You don't need to work so much." Something about the way he said it made my skin prickle. Like my working had been a choice. Like I hadn't been supporting us for 3 years while he studied. "We'll figure it out," I said finally. Because I was too tired to fight, and some part of me still wanted to believe this was just stress talking. New job jitters. He'd be himself again, once things settled down. But things didn't settle down. They got worse. Brandon started his job at Harrison and Blake, and suddenly he was a different person. He left for work at 7 in the morning in expensive suits I didn't remember him buying. He came home at 9, sometimes 10 at night, barely speaking to me except to complain about how exhausting his day had been. "You don't understand the pressure I'm under," he'd say when I tried to talk to him. "These partners expect perfection. I'm competing with a dozen other associates. I can't afford any mistakes." I was still working my double shifts. Still exhausted. Still the one buying groceries and paying most of the bills because Brandon's paychecks seemed to disappear into dry cleaning and lunches and networking expenses. 3 weeks into his new job, he forgot to mention a firm dinner until an hour before. "It's at Laurent's," he said, standing in our bedroom doorway while I was still in my scrubs from work. "We need to leave in 45 minutes. Brandon, I just got home. I worked a double shift. I haven't even showered. This is important, Claire. The senior partner specifically said spouses should attend." His tone made it clear this wasn't a request. I rushed through the fastest shower of my life and pulled out my best dress, the black one I'd worn to his law school graduation. It had cost me a week's wages, and I'd thought it was beautiful, professional, appropriate. When I came out of the bedroom, Brandon's face fell. "That's what you're wearing?" "It's my nicest dress." He checked his watch. "We don't have time for you to change. Just try to stay quiet during dinner, okay? Let me do the talking." Laurent's was the kind of restaurant where the menus don't have prices and the waiters wear white gloves. The other attorneys' wives were wearing dresses that probably cost more than our monthly rent. Their jewelry caught the light. Their hair looked like they'd stepped out of magazines. I felt like a child playing dress-up in her mother's clothes. Brandon's hand on my back was tight, controlling. As he guided me to our table, he introduced me to his colleagues with the barest minimum of detail. "This is my wife, Claire. Not Claire, who worked her fingers to the bone so I could be here. Not Claire, who believed in me when my own family didn't. Just Claire. Generic wife. Interchangeable accessory." One of the partners' wives, a woman named Christine with perfect blonde hair, tried to make conversation with me. "What do you do, Claire?" Before I could answer, Brandon jumped in. She's in healthcare. Technically true. Also completely misleading. I saw Christine's eyes light up with interest. Oh, are you a doctor? A nurse? I'm a nurse's aide, I said clearly, watching Brandon's jaw tighten. I work at Mercy General. Christine's smile didn't falter, but I saw the subtle shift in her expression. The recalculation. How wonderful. Healthcare workers are so important. The tone said she didn't think it was wonderful at all. The rest of the dinner was torture. I used the right forks because my mother had taught me table manners, even if we'd been poor. But I had nothing to contribute to conversations about vacation homes and private schools and country club memberships. I sat there feeling Brandon's tension radiating off him every time someone addressed me. On the drive home, he exploded. Healthcare? You had to specify nurse's aide? That's what I am, Brandon. Was I supposed to lie? You were supposed to be discreet. Do you know how it looked, having my wife admit she changes bedpans while everyone else's wives are talking about their careers as lawyers and executives? I stared at him. This man I'd married in a church basement. This man who'd promised we were a team. You're ashamed of me. I'm not ashamed. I'm just realistic. Image matters in my field, Claire. Whether we like it or not. We drove the rest of the way in silence. His mother visited the next week. I should have known that wouldn't go well. Mrs. Hayes walked through our apartment like she was touring a crime scene, her lips pressed thin with disapproval. Still in this neighborhood, she observed, running one manicured finger along our bookshelf and examining it for dust. Brandon, surely your salary is sufficient for something in a better area. We're comfortable here, I said, even though it was a lie. The walls were thin, and our neighbors fought loudly, and there was a weird smell in the hallway that never went away. Mrs. Hayes turned to look at me with those cold blue eyes. Yes, well, comfort is relative, isn't it? Some people have different standards than others. Brandon said nothing, just stood there letting his mother insult me in my own home. After she left, I found him going through our bank statements at the kitchen table. The expression on his face was calculating. Cold. Nothing like the warm-eyed boy who'd proposed to me with a small diamond ring and big promises. We need to talk about money, he said. My stomach dropped. Okay. I think you should quit one of your jobs, the weekend cleaning thing. It's beneath you. Beneath me. Brandon, that job pays for our groceries. I can cover groceries. I just need you to trust me on this. It doesn't look good, my wife scrubbing toilets. People talk. People? My voice was sharp. What people? He wouldn't meet my eyes. It came up at work. Someone saw you going into the Riverside office building with a cleaning cart. They mentioned it to one of the partners. The humiliation of it hit me like a wave. Not that I'd been seen working. I wasn't ashamed of honest work. But that Brandon was ashamed, that he'd been discussing me with his colleagues, like I was a problem to be managed. I need that job, I said quietly. No, you don't. Not anymore. I'm making enough now. But I looked at the bank statements spread across the table, and something didn't add up. Brandon's paychecks were good, but they weren't great. Not for a first-year associate. And somehow money still seemed tight. Tighter than it should be. Where's your paycheck going? I asked. Bills. Expenses. My student loans. Your student loans are deferred for another 6 months. His face closed off. I have other expenses, Claire. Clothes for work. Lunches with clients. These things cost money. I wanted to scream. I wanted to throw those bank statements in his face and ask him how much my sacrifices had cost. The years of double shifts, the exhaustion, the nights I'd fallen asleep crying because my body hurt so much. But I didn't. I just nodded and went to bed early, leaving him at the kitchen table. That's when I started noticing other things. Little things that added up. Brandon's phone was always face down now. He'd started going to the gym before work instead of after, which meant leaving the apartment at 5:30 in the morning. He came home smelling like expensive perfume sometimes, and when I asked about it, he said it must be from the cleaning products at the office. I wasn't stupid, but I also wasn't ready to admit what I was starting to suspect. 2 months after he started his job, I came home early from Mercy General. I'd been sent home with the flu, feeling miserable and feverish. All I wanted was to crawl into bed, I heard Brandon's voice from our bedroom before I even opened the door. He was on the phone, his tone casual and unguarded in a way he never sounded with me anymore. I stood in the hallway, my key still in my hand, and listened. It was a mistake marrying her. I just didn't know any better back then, you know? I was young and she seemed so, I don't know, genuine? But now, he laughed. It was a cruel sound. Once I've established myself at the firm for another year, I'll figure out how to handle the situation. Can't exactly have a wife who works as a janitor when I'm trying to make partner. My knees went weak. The hallway tilted. No, she doesn't suspect anything. She's too busy working her little jobs to notice much. Yeah, it's perfect actually. She pays most of the bills. I save my money. And when I'm ready to trade up, another laugh. I know. But hey, she served her purpose. Got me through law school. I'll make sure she lands on her feet, or whatever. I backed away from the door silently, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might break through my ribs. I made it to the bathroom and locked the door before the tears came. 3 years. 3 years of sacrifice, of believing in us, of working until my hands bled and my feet blistered and my body gave out. And I was just a stepping stone, a temporary inconvenience, something to be handled. I looked at myself in the mirror. Red-rimmed eyes, pale skin, hair that needed cutting, a woman who'd given everything and gotten nothing back. But underneath the hurt and betrayal, something else was starting to grow. Anger. Cold, clear, calculating anger. Brandon Hayes thought I was stupid. Thought I was too tired and too working class to see what he was doing. Thought he could use me up and throw me away. He had no idea who he was dealing with. I dried my eyes, flushed the toilet for show, and walked back out into the hallway. Brandon was off the phone now, lounging on the couch and scrolling through his cell. "You're home early," he said without looking up. "Feeling sick. They sent me home." Try not to get me sick. I have an important meeting tomorrow. I went into the bedroom and closed the door. Then I pulled out the notebook I kept in my nightstand and started writing down everything I could remember. Dates, amounts, conversations. If Brandon Hayes wanted to handle the situation, fine, but he wasn't the only one who could plan. I didn't confront Brandon after overhearing that phone call. Every instinct screamed at me to march into the living room and demand answers, to throw his words back in his face, to make him see the damage he'd done. But something stopped me. Maybe it was pride. Maybe it was survival instinct. Or maybe, after 3 years of being underestimated, I'd finally learned that the element of surprise was the strongest weapon I had. So instead, I became a student of my own marriage. I watched, I listened, I documented everything. Brandon kept his phone locked now, but he was careless with his laptop. I started checking his email when he was in the shower. Nothing too obvious I'd delete the read status so he wouldn't know. What I found made my stomach turn. Messages to his colleagues about upgrading, his living situation. Lunch receipts from expensive restaurants I'd never heard of, sometimes 2 or 3 a week. And emails with a junior associate named Vanessa Cho that were just a little too familiar, a little too frequent, filled with inside jokes and late-night work sessions I was never told about. Working late again? I'd ask when he'd text me at 7 saying he wouldn't be home for dinner. Big case. Vanessa and I are going through depositions. Vanessa and I. Never the team or a few of us. Always Vanessa and I. I kept working my double shifts. But now I was saving every penny I could in an account Brandon didn't know about. An old checking account from before we got married that I'd never closed. $5 here, $10 there, sometimes 20 if I picked up an extra weekend shift. It wasn't much, but it was mine. My safety net for whatever was coming. Tommy noticed something was wrong. My little brother had always been able to read me like a book. He showed up at my apartment one Saturday morning with coffee and bagels, taking one look at my face and saying, "What did he do?" "Nothing. I'm fine." "Claire." Tommy set the coffee down and crossed his arms. At 29, he still had that protective streak that made him want to fight my battles for me. "You look like you haven't slept in a week. And don't tell me it's work because I know what work exhaustion looks like versus heartbreak exhaustion." I broke. Told him everything. The phone call. Brandon's coldness. The way he treated me like an embarrassment instead of a partner. Tommy's face got redder and redder as I talked. "I'm going to kill him," he said when I finished. "I'm going to walk over to that fancy law firm and knock his teeth down his throat." "No, you're not, Claire." "Tommy, please." I grabbed his hand. "I need you to promise me you won't do anything. Don't call him. Don't confront him. Nothing." "Why? Why are you protecting him?" "I'm not protecting him. I'm protecting myself." I took a shaky breath. "If you go after him now, he'll know I told you. He'll know I'm aware of what he's doing, and then I lose any advantage I might have." Tommy's jaw worked. "What kind of advantage? I don't know yet. But I'm figuring it out." I squeezed his hand. "Trust me, please." He didn't like it, but he promised. Before he left, he hugged me tight and said, "You're stronger than he knows, stronger than he deserves." I held on to those words in the weeks that followed because I needed them. Brandon's transformation continued. He joined an expensive gym downtown, the kind with personal trainers and eucalyptus towels. He bought new suits that cost more than my monthly rent used to be. He started using hair product and cologne that made our bathroom smell like a department store. "You look nice," I said one morning, meaning it. Whatever else was true, Brandon had always been handsome. He barely glanced at me. "Partner meeting today. Need to look sharp." Right. I was still in my scrubs, about to head to my shift. My hair was in the same ponytail it was always in. I hadn't bought new clothes in over a year. The distance between us wasn't just emotional anymore. It was visual, physical. Anyone looking at us could see we didn't match. 3 months after the phone call I'd overheard, Brandon announced there was a firm dinner I needed to attend. Not asked, announced. This one was mandatory for all associates and their spouses. "It's at the Platinum Room," he said. Black tie. I didn't own anything black tie. The best I could manage was the same black dress from before, with a shawl I borrowed from a co-worker. When Brandon saw me ready to go, his mouth tightened. "That's what you have?" "It's all I have." For a moment, something flickered in his eyes. Guilt, maybe, but it passed quickly. "Let's just go." The Platinum Room was even fancier than Laurent's. Crystal chandeliers, real orchids on every table, women in designer gowns that probably cost more than I made in 6 months. And there was Brandon's mother, sitting at a corner table with Brandon's father, holding court like a queen. Of course they'd been invited. Of course. "Brandon, darling." Mrs. Hayes rose to kiss her son's cheek, then turned to me with that same cold smile. "Claire, how? Nice to see you again." The evening was a nightmare from the start. I was seated between Mrs. Hayes and an older partner's wife, who spent the entire salad course talking about her daughter's wedding at Martha's Vineyard. I had nothing to contribute. I'd never been to Martha's Vineyard. I'd never been anywhere. After a few glasses of wine, Mrs. Hayes got bold. "You know, Claire," she said loudly enough that several people nearby turned to look, "you must be so proud that Brandon's done so well. Despite everything." The word everything hung in the air like a slap. "Despite marrying you," she meant. "Despite choosing you over us. Despite the handicap of having you as his wife." Brandon heard her. I know he did because I saw his shoulders tense, but he didn't say anything. Didn't defend me. Just kept talking to the senior partner about some case like his mother. Hadn't just publicly humiliated me. "Excuse me," I said quietly, standing up. "I need to use the restroom." Nobody seemed to notice me leave. The bathroom was all marble and gold fixtures and little hand towels with the restaurant's logo embroidered on them. I stood at the sink, gripping the cold edge, trying to steady my breathing. The door opened behind me. 2 women walked in, still talking, not noticing me in the corner stall area. "Did you see Brandon Hayes' wife?" one of them said. I recognized the voice, Vanessa Cho. I mean, I knew she was working class, but wow. "Brandon complains about her constantly," the other woman said. "Apparently he's just waiting for the right time to cut her loose." My heart stopped. "Really?" Vanessa sounded eager for gossip. "He told you that?" "Not in those exact words, but come on. It's obvious. He calls it his starter marriage. Says he was young and stupid and didn't know he could do better. Once he's established at the firm for another year, he'll divorce her, and find someone more appropriate. They both laughed. The door opened and closed, and they were gone, leaving me standing there with my whole world crumbling around me. Start a marriage. Trade up. Handle the situation. All different ways of saying the same thing. I was disposable. I looked at myself in that gilded mirror. Really looked. And I saw what they all saw, a tired woman in a cheap dress who didn't belong in rooms like this. Someone who could be used and discarded without consequence. But underneath that reflection, I saw something else. Something Brandon had never noticed, because he was too busy being ashamed of me. I saw someone who knew how to survive, how to work, how to plan. Someone who'd put her husband through law school with nothing but determination and double shifts. Someone who was done being underestimated. I walked back to the table, sat down next to Brandon, and leaned over to whisper in his ear, "I want a divorce." His head snapped toward me. For one unguarded second, I saw relief flash across his face. Pure, undisguised relief. Then he caught himself and arranged his features into concern. "Claire, you're being emotional. Let's talk about this at home." "No." I stood up, and this time people did notice. The table got quiet. "I'm done talking. I want a divorce." Mrs. Hayes looked delighted. Brandon looked panicked, probably calculating how this looked to his colleagues. "Claire, please sit down. You're making a scene." "You're right. I am." I grabbed my borrowed shawl. "I'll be gone by the time you get home. My brother will come get my things tomorrow." I walked out of the platinum room with my head high, feeling dozens of eyes on my back. Let them stare. Let them whisper. Let Brandon explain to his precious colleagues why his wife just walked out on him in front of everyone who mattered. I didn't have anywhere to go, so I went to Tommy's apartment. He took one look at my face and pulled me inside. "I'm getting divorced," I said. "Good," Tommy said fiercely. "That man never deserved you." But that night, lying on Tommy's couch and staring at the ceiling, I realized something. Walking away wasn't enough. Brandon thought he'd gotten away with it. Thought he'd used me and moved on and there'd be no consequences. He thought I'd just disappear quietly, grateful for whatever scraps he threw me in the divorce. He had no idea that every bank statement was saved in my folder, every timesheet from the last 6 years, every receipt for his law school books that I'd paid for, every rent check I'd covered while he focused on studying. I'd spent 3 years supporting a man who planned to throw me away. Now I'd spend however long it took making sure he understood exactly what that was going to cost him. The next morning, I called a legal aid attorney and made an appointment. Brandon called 17 times. I didn't answer. He showed up at Tommy's apartment, but Tommy wouldn't let him in. "She doesn't want to see you," Tommy said through the locked door. "I just want to talk to her." "Please. Should have thought of that before you treated her like garbage." Through the door, I heard Brandon's voice change. "Get colder. More calculated. Tell Claire she's making a mistake. If she wants to do this the hard way, I have lawyers who will destroy her." Tommy slammed his palm against the door. "Get out before I come out there." After Brandon left, Tommy turned to me. "He's going to fight dirty." "I know," I said. "Good thing I've been preparing." Because I had been. The folder in my bag was 3 inches thick now. Bank statements, timesheets, pay stubs, photos of receipts. A detailed timeline of every dollar I'd contributed to Brandon's education and career. And I had one more thing. One piece of information I'd discovered while going through old papers. Something that changed everything. But I wasn't ready to use it yet. Not until the time was right. Not until it would do the most damage. Brandon Hayes thought he was the lawyer. The smart one. The one who knew how to win. He was about to learn that underestimating your opponent was the fastest way to lose. The divorce papers arrived 3 days later, delivered by a process server to Tommy's apartment where I was staying. Brandon hadn't wasted any time. What surprised me was the letterhead. Harrison and Blake, his own firm, wasn't representing him. Instead, the papers came from Foster and Associates, and the attorney listed was Diane Foster herself. Tommy watched me read through the documents, his face getting darker with every page I turned. "What does it say?" "He's offering me $5,000 and 30 days to vacate the apartment." My voice sounded hollow even to my own ears. That's it. $5,000 for 6 years of marriage. That's insane. You can fight that, right? I kept reading. The language was cold, clinical, brutal. Brandon's petition painted me as a woman who'd contributed nothing to the marriage, who'd been supported by his income, who was now attempting to profit from his success through an opportunistic divorce. Every line was a lie, every paragraph a knife in the back. He's claiming he supported me, I said quietly, that I was dependent on him financially throughout the marriage. That's the opposite of what happened. I know. I set the papers down carefully, my hands shaking. He's counting on me not being able to prove otherwise. Poor people don't keep good records, right? We're too busy surviving to document everything. But I had documented everything. And Brandon had no idea. The legal aid attorney I'd contacted, a tired-looking woman named Lisa Brennan, reviewed my folder with increasingly wide eyes. Mrs. Hayes, this is extraordinary documentation. I work in healthcare, I said. We're trained to keep detailed records. You have pay stubs going back 6 years, timesheets, copies of checks, even photographs of receipts. Lisa looked up at me with something like respect. Do you know what he's offering you in the settlement? $5,000. Her laugh was bitter. Of course he is. And let me guess, his attorney is Diane Foster. You know her? Everyone knows her. She's the best divorce attorney in the city if you can afford her. She's also ruthless. Lisa tapped the folder. But she's used to people rolling over. She's not used to clients who come prepared like this. So we can fight it? Lisa hesitated. Mrs. Hayes, Claire, I need to be honest with you. Foster is going to bury us in motions and delays. She'll make this as expensive and drawn out as possible, hoping you'll give up and take whatever settlement they offer. That's her strategy. I'm not giving up. The legal aid office can represent you, but our resources are limited. Foster will have paralegals and investigators and expert witnesses. We'll have me and whatever I can pull together between my other 90 cases. She looked at me seriously. This is going to be hard. Probably the hardest thing you've ever done. I thought about the last 6 years. The double shifts. The exhaustion. Coming home to a husband who looked at me like I was an embarrassment. I've done hard before, I said. Let's do this. The first hearing was a mediation session 2 weeks later. Brandon showed up in one of his expensive suits with Diane Foster beside him, in heels that probably cost more than my car. They looked like they'd already won. I wore my Target dress and sat next to Lisa at the conference table. Across from us, Brandon wouldn't meet my eyes. Diane opened with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Let's not waste anyone's time. My client is willing to be generous $7,000 and 60 days to vacate the marital residence. Generous? Lisa's voice was sharp. Your client's wife worked full-time throughout the marriage while he attended law school. She contributed substantially to household expenses. My client earned a graduate degree and launched a professional career. Diane countered smoothly. Any contributions Mrs. Hayes made were in her capacity as a spouse, not as an investor or business partner. She has no claim to his future earnings. We're not asking for future earnings. We're asking for recognition of past contributions. Diane laughed. Actually laughed. Mrs. Hayes worked as a nurse's aide and a part-time cleaner. We're talking about what? $30,000 a year? Hardly a significant contribution compared to the earning potential my client now has, thanks to his education. The dismissive way she said it, part-time cleaner, like my work was nothing, made my blood boil. But I stayed quiet, watching Brandon, who was studying his hands like they were fascinating. Mrs. Hayes also has no college degree and limited career prospects, Diane continued. My client is already being more than fair, considering she'll receive spousal support of sorts through this settlement. Legally, he owes her nothing. Actually, Lisa said calmly, pulling out a document from my folder. We'd like to discuss the financial arrangements during the marriage in more detail. Diane waved a hand. We've reviewed the relevant bank statements. Mr. Hayes's income supported the household. Did it? Lisa slid the paper across the table. Because according to Mrs. Hayes's records, she contributed approximately $186,000 to household expenses and her husband's educational costs over 6 years. The silence that followed was deafening. Diane picked up the paper, her expression unchanging, but I saw her eyes moving rapidly across the numbers. Brandon had gone pale. "This is creative accounting," Diane said finally. "Inflated figures designed to—" "Every number is documented," Lisa interrupted. "Pay stubs, cancelled checks, bank transfers, receipts. Mrs. Hayes kept meticulous records. We can provide backup documentation for every single dollar claimed." Brandon finally looked up, and for the first time since this started, I saw real fear in his eyes. He leaned over to whisper something to Diane, but she shook her head slightly. "Even if these numbers are accurate," Diane said, her voice losing some of its confidence, "contributions to a marriage don't constitute a loan. This was a partnership. My client doesn't owe repayment for normal household expenses." "Normal household expenses? No," Lisa agreed. "But Mrs. Hayes paid for her husband's law school tuition, books, bar exam fees, professional wardrobe, and living expenses. While he was a full-time student with no income, she has documentation showing she requested repayment multiple times after he became employed, and he refused. Another lie, but a strategic one. I'd never actually asked for repayment because it had never occurred to me that I'd need to, but Brandon couldn't prove I hadn't asked, and the implication was devastating. "This is ridiculous," Brandon said suddenly, his voice tight. "Claire, what are you doing?" I looked at him directly for the first time since entering the room. "I'm asking for what's fair." "Fair? I gave you 6 years of my life. You gave me 6 years." The words came out sharper than I intended. "I worked 70-hour weeks so you could study. I paid your rent, your food, your law school application fees. I stood by you when your own parents cut you off for marrying me. And the second you passed the bar, I became an embarrassment you couldn't wait to get rid of. That's not—" He stopped, realizing anything he said could be used against him. Diane put a hand on his arm. "My client doesn't need to respond to emotional accusations." She turned to Lisa. "What exactly are you asking for? Recognition of the $186,000 as a personal loan, with standard 6% interest, bringing the total owed to $223,000. Diane actually laughed out loud this time. "You cannot be serious. No court will." "Then we'll let a court decide," Lisa said calmly. "We're prepared to go to trial. A trial will cost your client far more in legal fees than she could possibly win. Maybe. But it will also cost your client his reputation." Lisa pulled out another document. "It will become public record that Brandon Hayes financed his legal education entirely through his wife's labor, while telling everyone he came from money, that he married someone he considered beneath him, used her, and then tried to discard her with $5,000. I imagine the partners at Harrison and Blake would find that very interesting reading." Brandon's face had gone from pale to grey. He leaned toward Diane and whispered urgently. She listened, her expression hardening, then called for a recess. Lisa and I stepped into the hallway while Brandon and Diane huddled in the conference room. "That was amazing," I said, my hands shaking with adrenaline. "Don't celebrate yet. They're going to come back with a counteroffer, probably something significant, and they're going to pressure you to take it." Lisa looked at me seriously. "The question is, what do you actually want from this?" I thought about it. About Brandon's cold voice on the phone saying I was a mistake. About his mother's cruel smile. About Vanessa Cho laughing in the bathroom about my cheap dress. "I want him to understand what it costs to underestimate someone," I said. "I want him to know he can't just use people and throw them away without consequences. And if he offers you enough money to start over, to go back to school, buy a house, build the life you put on hold for him, then I'll take it," I said, "because that's what I earned. Not as his wife, as the person who believed in him when no one else did." 20 minutes later, Diane and Brandon emerged. Brandon looked like he'd aged 10 years. Diane's expression was carefully neutral. "My client is willing to offer a settlement of $75,000, the car, and 6 months to vacate the apartment," Diane said. "In exchange, Mrs. Hayes signs a non-disclosure agreement and makes no public statements about the marriage or divorce. $75,000. It was more money than I'd ever had at once. Enough to finish my nursing degree. Enough to start over. But it wasn't enough. Not for what he'd done. Not for what he'd planned to do. "We'll consider it," Lisa said, and I could hear the surprise in her voice that I hadn't immediately accepted. "There's a time limit," Diane said. "This offer expires in 48 hours. After that, we proceed to trial, and I promise you, my client will spare no expense in defending himself." Back in Lisa's office, she turned to me with disbelief written all over her face. "Claire, that's a good offer. Better than good. With a non-disclosure agreement, you could take the money and move on with your life." "I don't want to move on quietly," I said. "I want to go to trial." "Why? You'll spend months in court, maybe years. It'll be expensive and exhausting, and there's no guarantee you'll win more than what he's offering now." I pulled out one more document from my folder, the one I'd been saving. The one that changed everything. "Because I have proof that Brandon's family didn't just disapprove of our marriage," I said quietly. "I have proof they cut him off completely. Every cent of his law school, every expense, every dollar he told people came from his trust fund. It all came from me. And he's been lying about it to everyone, including the firm, for 6 years." Lisa took the document, a letter from Brandon's father, that I'd found hidden in a box of old papers. The letter was dated 3 weeks after our engagement, and it was crystal clear. Brandon would receive no financial support if he married me. Not for law school, not for anything. He'd made his choice, and his family had made theirs. "He's been telling people at the firm that he comes from money," I continued, "that his family is wealthy and connected. It's part of his image, part of why they hired him. But it's all a lie. He married me, got cut off, used my money to build his career, and then tried to erase me like I never existed." Lisa read the letter twice, then looked up at me with something like awe. "Claire, this is why we're going to trial," I finished. "Because Brandon Hayes is about to learn that the truth always comes out eventually, and when it did, I'd be there to watch his carefully constructed world fall apart, piece by piece. Just like he'd done to me." The 48 hours came and went. Brandon's offer expired without a response from me. 2 days later, we got the notification that the case was going to trial. Lisa called me that evening, and I could hear the stress in her voice. "Claire, I need you to be absolutely certain about this. Diane Foster is going to come at us with everything. She'll try to destroy your credibility, paint you as vindictive and greedy. Are you ready for that?" I thought about the woman I'd been 6 years ago, the one who'd believed in love and partnership and happily ever after. That woman would have been terrified, but I wasn't her anymore. "I'm ready," I said. The trial was scheduled for 3 weeks later. In that time, Diane filed motion after motion, trying to get my evidence excluded, trying to delay, trying to exhaust our resources. But Lisa fought back, and somehow, we kept moving forward. Tommy helped me prepare, running through potential questions Diane might ask, making sure I stayed calm. "Don't let her rattle you," he said the night before trial. "Just tell the truth. That's all you need to do." The morning of the trial, I put on the same black dress I'd worn to all those firm dinners, the one Brandon had been ashamed of. I wore it deliberately, as a reminder to myself of everything I'd survived. The courtroom was smaller than I'd expected. Wood paneling, fluorescent lights, an American flag in the corner. Judge Patricia Reeves sat behind the bench, a woman in her late 50s with sharp eyes and an expression that suggested she'd heard every lie ever told. Brandon sat at the defense table with Diane, looking every inch the successful attorney in his tailored suit. He still wouldn't look at me. The trial started with opening statements. Diane painted Brandon as a self-made man who'd worked hard to build his career. Burdened now by a vindictive ex-wife trying to profit from his success, she made me sound calculating and cold, someone who'd kept receipts and records because I'd always planned to use them as weapons. Lisa's opening was simpler. She told the truth about the double shifts, the sacrifices, the promises broken, about a man who'd used his wife's labor and loyalty to build a career, then tried to erase her from his story. Then came the testimony. Brandon went first, smooth and polished. He admitted I'd worked during our marriage but characterized my contributions as normal spousal support. He claimed he'd always intended to take care of me once he was established, but I'd changed and become bitter about his success. I loved Claire, he said, and he actually sounded sincere. But she couldn't handle that my life was evolving. She wanted me to stay the same person I was when we met, and that wasn't fair to either of us. It was a masterful performance. Reasonable, sad. The story of a relationship that simply grew apart. Then Diane began presenting their case. She brought up my work history, my lack of education, subtly suggesting I'd always been dependent on Brandon even when the facts said otherwise. She made my careful record-keeping sound obsessive, paranoid. Mrs. Hayes kept detailed documentation of every expense, Diane said, holding up my folder like it was evidence of mental instability. Every receipt, every bank statement, photographed and filed. Does this sound like a loving wife, or someone planning an exit strategy? The implication hung in the air that I'd been the calculating one all along. When it was my turn to testify, my hands were shaking as I took the stand. Lisa walked me through the timeline carefully. Meeting Brandon, his acceptance to law school, the agreement that I'd work extra hours to support us. Did you consider this a loan at the time? Lisa asked. No, I said honestly. I considered it a partnership. I thought we were building a future together. When did that change? I took a breath. When I overheard my husband on the phone, telling someone that marrying me was a mistake, and he was waiting for the right time to handle the situation. Diane objected, calling it hearsay. But Judge Reeves allowed it as my personal perception of events. Then came Diane's cross-examination. She was every bit as brutal as I'd expected. Mrs. Hayes, isn't it true that you never finished college yourself? Yes. And isn't it true that your income, while you were working these so-called double shifts, was still less than what most college graduates make? I suppose so. So really, you were working normal hours for someone of your education level, weren't you? This wasn't some extraordinary sacrifice, it was just regular work that you're now trying to inflate into something noble. I felt my face get hot. I was working 70 hours a week. Many people work long hours, Mrs. Hayes. That doesn't entitle them to their spouse's future earnings. I'm not asking for his future earnings. I'm asking for recognition of what I contributed. Contributed? Or invested? Diane's smile was sharp. Because it sounds like you kept all these records because you were planning to cash in eventually. That's not true. Then why keep such detailed records? Why photograph receipts from 6 years ago, unless you were building a case? I opened my mouth and closed it again. Because she was right, in a way. Not about my motivations, but about how it looked. Lisa tried to redirect on re-examination, but the damage was done. The jury, no, wait. There was no jury in family court. Judge Reeves would decide everything, and I had no idea what she was thinking behind those sharp eyes. The trial continued for 2 more grueling days. Lisa presented all my documentation, walking through each expense, each contribution. It was overwhelming, the sheer volume of it. Years of my life reduced to numbers on bank statements. Diane brought character witnesses, Brandon's colleagues, who testified about his work ethic, his dedication. His mother even took the stand, dabbing at her eyes as she talked about how worried she'd been when Brandon married too young, and how she'd tried to support the marriage, even though she had reservations. The lies were breathtaking. On the final day, Lisa called me back to the stand for one last piece of testimony. Mrs. Hayes, do you have anything else you'd like the court to consider? I pulled out the envelope, the one I'd been carrying since this started. Inside was the letter from Brandon's father, but there was something else too, something I'd found just a week ago, buried in old emails I'd recovered from a laptop we used to share. Your Honor, I'd like to submit evidence showing that Mr. Hayes misrepresented his financial background to his employer. Diane was on her feet immediately. Objection! This is outside the scope. It's directly relevant to the question of who supported whom during the marriage, Lisa argued. Judge Reeves held out her hand. I'll review it. I watched her read the letter from Brandon's father first. Her eyebrows rose. Then she read the email chain. I'd found messages between Brandon and a friend where he explicitly discussed hiding the fact that his family had cut him off, where he bragged about using my income while building an image of family wealth at his firm. The judge read it twice. Then she looked up at Brandon with an expression that made him visibly squirm. "Mr. Hayes, did your family provide any financial support during your law school years?" Brandon glanced at Diane, who looked like she wanted to object but couldn't find grounds. "No, Your Honor." "And did you at any time give your employer or colleagues the impression that you came from financial means?" A long pause. "I may have allowed some assumptions." "Did you lie to your firm about your background, Mr. Hayes?" "I never explicitly said." "Did you lie by omission?" Brandon's jaw worked. "Yes, Your Honor." The courtroom was completely silent. Judge Reeves set the papers down and sat back in her chair. "Does either counsel have anything else before I make my ruling?" Lisa started to speak, but I touched her arm. "Your Honor, may I say something?" Judge Reeves nodded. I stood up, my legs shaking but my voice steady. "Your Honor, I don't want to destroy Brandon's career. I don't want revenge. I just want recognition that I mattered, that the 6 years I spent supporting him meant something, that I'm not just someone who can be used and thrown away without consequence." My voice cracked on the last word, and I sat down quickly. Judge Reeves was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "I'll issue my ruling after a brief recess." 20 minutes felt like 20 hours. Brandon and Diane huddled together, whispering urgently. Lisa and I sat in silence, her hand on my shoulder. When Judge Reeves returned, her face was unreadable. "I've reviewed all the evidence and testimony," she began. "This is a case about what we value in a marriage, about the work we see and the work we ignore." Mrs. Hayes kept detailed records. Yes, but those records tell a story that Mr. Hayes tried very hard to hide. She looked at Brandon. "Mr. Hayes, you financed your education and early career entirely through your wife's labor. You then attempted to erase her contribution from your personal narrative, going so far as to misrepresent your financial background to your employer and colleagues. You treated your wife as a temporary convenience, waiting for the right moment to, as you put it, handle the situation." Brandon had gone grey. "Mrs. Hayes is asking for recognition of $186,000 in contributions, plus interest. While I cannot classify marital contributions as a formal loan, I can, and will, consider them in the division of marital assets and in determining appropriate spousal support." Judge Reeves pulled out a document and began reading her ruling. "Brandon would pay me $150,000 as my share of marital assets. He would also pay spousal support of $2,000 per month for 5 years, enough time for me to complete my education and establish my own career. The car would be mine, the apartment would be his, but I'd have 4 months to find new housing. It wasn't everything I'd asked for, but it was more than I dared to hope. Furthermore," Judge Reeves continued, "I'm ordering that Mr. Hayes provide Mrs. Hayes with a letter of reference for her nursing school applications, acknowledging her work ethic and dedication." Diane started to object, but Judge Reeves held up a hand. "The court recognizes that Mrs. Hayes sacrificed her own education and career advancement to support her husband's ambitions. The least Mr. Hayes can do is acknowledge that sacrifice in writing." She looked at me, and something in her expression softened. "Mrs. Hayes, I hope you'll use this opportunity to build the life you postponed. You've more than earned it." I couldn't speak, could only nod as tears ran down my face. Judge Reeves banged her gavel. "This court is adjourned." In the hallway afterward, Brandon tried to approach me, but Tommy stepped between us. "Don't," Tommy said. "You've done enough." Brandon looked at me over my brother's shoulder. For the first time in months, he really looked at me, and I saw it finally regret. Real, genuine regret. "Claire, goodbye, Brandon," I said quietly, and I walked away. 3 months later, I enrolled in the nursing program at State University. I found a small apartment with big windows and neighbors who smiled when they saw me. I bought plants and furniture that was actually mine, not ours. Tommy helped me move in, carrying boxes up 3 flights of stairs without complaining once. "You did it," he said, setting down the last box. "You really did it." "We did it," I corrected. I couldn't have done this without you. That night, after Tommy left, I sat at my new kitchen table with a cup of tea and my nursing school textbooks spread out in front of me. The evening sun came through the window, warm and golden. My phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. You were always too good for him. I'm sorry I couldn't see it. Brandon's mother. I deleted it without responding. I didn't need her apology. Didn't need anyone's validation anymore. I'd learned something important through all of this. The people who underestimate you, who treat you as less than you are, they're not the ones who get to define your worth. You define it yourself, by surviving, by fighting back, by refusing to disappear quietly just because someone decided you weren't good enough. I opened my textbook and started reading. Outside, the city hummed with evening traffic and distant sirens and the sounds of other people living their lives. I was free, and I was just getting started.